All right, guys, so this is going to be federal bureaucracy. This is the rest of the executive branch. You know, we talked about we have the president, we have the vice president, we have the president's cabinet, which will be included in this. Unfortunately, I'm just going to clarify here. I tried to, if you remember in the last video, I linked a Saturday Night Live Schoolhouse Rock video. Well, YouTube has copyright striked that video, so I will not be able to play my little links as I typically do in class in these videos because YouTube keeps blocking them. So we're not, unfortunately I can't do that. So I'm just going to have to kind of link through because I don't want this stuff to get blocked. I might be able to work around it in ClassLink, but we'll see. So let's present. All right. So let's go through this. All right, here we go. Okay, so federal bureaucracy, the hands and feet of government, the executive branch. So what is a bureaucracy? I like to say in my class when I teach this in person that the bureaucracy, the word, is one of those $10 words. If you start throwing this word around, people are going to be like, "Whoa, how did you know that?" So, a bureaucracy is a large, complex administrative structure that handles the everyday business of an organization. In this case, in this section that we're discussing, it's going to be the federal government. However, I give an example at the bottom here, an example of another bureaucracy that you might understand or relate to is a school district. So if you think about the Tuscaloosa City School District, for example, the superintendent, Dr. Daria, might be someone we compare to like the president because he is the head of the organization. Underneath that, you've also got the school administrators, the principals. You've also got the department or agency heads, okay? And these principals are in charge of running the individual parts of the organization. Each school that is part of the school district is run by an administrator or several administrators. Underneath that, you have teachers and school staff, and those are compared to like the civil service of the federal government. They are responsible for carrying out the actual function of the school district, which is to educate students. And you notice that we have a lot of teachers. Most schools in our district, you're going to see at least 50 teachers on staff, and that's for each school. And then again, like we said, above them are the principals, and then above that is the superintendent. All right, so that's just kind of giving you an example of what a bureaucracy looks like. So the federal bureaucracy, this is part of the executive branch, is responsible for carrying out the laws and functions of the U.S. government. What you need to know is that the president is only one person. And we also said in the last notes section that the purpose of the executive branch is to carry out or execute the law, which means that if Congress makes a law, the executive branch's job is to make sure that that law is followed. Okay? So, some people refer to the federal bureaucracy as the fourth branch of government because it's so big. It includes roughly 2.7 million people, and that's not including the military, hired to implement and enforce the laws and rules of the United States government. There are over 2,000 agencies, departments, commissions, etc. Now, main parts of the federal bureaucracy. There's three main parts, and you have these in your notes. So, the first part is the Executive Office of the President, known as the EOP, and this includes the White House office. And we'll get into these in just a second in detail. Underneath that, you have the 15 executive departments, also known as the Cabinet. And then underneath that, we have what are known as independent agencies like NASA. And we'll talk about those in depth. So the first, we'll talk about the Executive Office of the President. These are people who work within the White House. So this says they provide the president with support and services he needs to govern effectively. So Some of these people are going to be in the White House. Some of these people have offices other places, but these are people who work very closely with the president to help him govern the country. So the first thing is Office of Management and Budget. You also have your Council of Economic Advisors, the Office of Personnel Management, and your National Security Council. The president, again, like we said, has the power to put certain people in certain positions. However, these top officials for these offices right here have to have the Senate approval. So just as if he were to select somebody to be on the Supreme Court, again, in that position, they also require the Senate to approve. Okay. So, White House office. This is the EOP. They are the day-to-day staff that assist, advise, and work with the president in the White House. They're very loyal to the president. I have to say here that my PowerPoint is a little outdated as far as, just, for example, Sarah Huckabee is no longer the White House press secretary. It is now Kayleigh, how do I say her last name? I think it's McEnany. Okay. So she is the new White House press secretary. So you may have seen her. She's kind of a thinner blonde woman. Anyway, so it's normal for the president to kind of go through several press secretaries while he's in office. Obama also has several. It's just typical. All right. So again, like we were saying, the White House office staff, they act as a filter of info to the president. The important or notable positions that you might have heard about before are the chief of staff, the press secretary, and the White House counsel. So this is just somebody who's looking into the Oval Office here. All right. The executive or cabinet departments. So the cabinet handles major areas of concern for the federal government. You have foreign affairs, defense, transportation, education, etc. There are 15 total departments, and they've grown over time to handle the needs of the nation. You might have this on a test question. The original 3 cabinet positions that were under Washington were Department of State, Department of Treasury, and Department of War or Defense. The newest and most recent was Homeland Security. And I always ask my students, why do you think, or when do you think Homeland Security really became a big deal? The answer was around 9/11, because we had, we started to deal with more and more terrorist organizations. Executive department leadership. So you have the head of each department, the secretary, followed by the undersecretary/deputy. All of these are appointed by the president, and again, like we said, any major appointments they have to be confirmed by the Senate. The only non-secretary is the Attorney General, and he is the head of the Justice Department. And you might have heard from the Attorney General at this point during 2020. Oh my gosh. I'm having a blank on his name. Okay, I'm sorry. So William Barr. I remember now. William Barr is his name. For some reason I was thinking of another person. So William Barr is the current Attorney General under President Trump. So that person, they have 2 secretary roles. They run their department, but they also advise the president, sometimes in conflict with the first. And there's been several times that Attorney General Barr has actually been in disagreement with President Trump. But if you remember most recently, Attorney General Barr was kind of the one who made the decision, along with the president, to send federal officials to Portland and some of these other major cities to try to figure out, with the riots and things like that. Again, this is the picture of the president's cabinet. Unfortunately, I can't play the video clip because I don't want it to get struck down on YouTube and blocked. So I will just have to do that later. But these are the actual seals, okay? These little pictures here, they are known as their seals. And this is showing, each cabinet position. Again, if you notice here, the Homeland Security, this was added in 2003. And if you remember, we had September 11th, that was 2001. So if you look here, it shows each year that these departments were added. And I want to say education, right. Yeah, education was not officially added until 1979. 15, oh, there we go. 15 departments. You're going to need to write these down. And well, they might actually already be on your nose. I think they're already on your nose. Now, one other thing that you need to know, and we talked about this in the first section, the U.S. presidency notes. We talked about presidential succession. All right. So we said that if the president were to be assassinated, what is the order of succession? Which means who's going to come after him. So we said that obviously if the president is no longer in office, or if he dies, okay, then automatically it's the vice president. Next, okay, we said it's Speaker of the House. Then it goes President pro tempore. And then it goes in order down this line. Okay? So if they knocked out everybody, it would have to go all the way down to the end of this list. And I'm sure they have it in place after that of who would be in power. But this is, very unlikely that everybody would get taken out. 3, we're going to get into independent agencies. While there are a number of agencies, offices, and bureaus organized within the department, there are a number of agencies that are technically independent because they don't really fit into any one department. The reason it also is protection from partisan and pressure politics. When we say partisan, the root word there is party. Okay, so party politics. Bipartisan means 2 parties. One, or just partisan, is 1 party. And so they want to protect against one-sided views. Okay? So that's why it's kind of independent. Unique and sensitive nature of their purpose is also a reason for their independence. And you'll see what I mean in just a second when we talk about these independent agencies. There's not really a place that fits, or they fit in those cabinet positions. Again, these agency heads are appointed by the president, and they're confirmed by the Senate. So the first, we'll talk the 3 types. The first, we have the independent executive agencies. Those are created outside the departments for narrower purposes. These are examples: the Central Intelligence Agency. You have NASA. You also have the Peace Corps. And if you don't know what the Peace Corps are, this was kind of big during the 1970s and the end of the 1960s because it was kind of a joke at that point because people who didn't necessarily agree with the Vietnam War or didn't necessarily want to serve in the Vietnam War would just end up joining the Peace Corps, and they would be transferred to another country where they would kind of do humanitarian work or, just help take care of things in other countries. So that's kind of what the Peace Corps do. Also, and if there is any kind of major natural event, sometimes they'll send in the Peace Corps, and then those are people who will just help kind of clean up or, take care of the citizens of those other countries and things like that. So NASA, I think we all know what NASA is. And then obviously the CIA. I think we kind of know what the CIA is too. You also have your independent regulatory commissions. Those are largely outside the reach of the government control, and they're responsible for regulating large industries / the economy. Major example here is the Federal Reserve. They're the ones that kind of handle the money coming in and going out. You also have the Federal Communications Commission, and you have the Security and Exchange Commission, the SEC. 3 types, the last type, we have government corporations. And so this is one I get into a little bit because a government or corporation, it's owned by the government, but it's kind of like its own business as well. So, for example, the Postal Service. Can you sell goods and services from the Postal Service? Yes, you purchase the boxes. If you go in there, you purchase stamps. But they are also owned by the government. Now, if you notice, they're in the news right now because of the supposedly, they're trying to say that they're run out of money. Here's the thing. The U.S. Postal Service is backed by taxpayer dollars. Okay, so it's not going to run out of money unless the government stops giving it money. Okay, same thing with Amtrak. All right, Amtrak is also government owned, but it kind of operates as its own business as well. So that's the last type. Okay, we'll talk about civil service. Civil service is the civilian workforce that carries out the work of the bureaucracy, and these are the people who just work underneath these different positions. It's made up of over 2.7 million employees. Examples of civil service employees: anybody who works at the post office, they are technically a federal worker. You have your EPA inspector, an IT technician, National Park Ranger, and many more. And I will say, if you join the military especially, you can, for example, if you join the military for any kind of technology or IT training, IT work, you can get a job with the federal government that's paying a very nice amount of money. So these are also options for you after you graduate high school, if you wanted to lead into that direction. I know there's some people who will go into, let's say, criminal justice, but they'll also serve in the military, and then that way when they finish, they are able to get a job working with the government and kind of can act in, the Justice Department. Hiring in the civil services. Now, this is typically how people receive jobs or got jobs in the civil service before, when we say before, so this was before 1883 and even a little bit prior, a little bit after that. So typically, if you wanted to get a job working in the federal government, it was based on the spoils system. We call it spoils. Okay, because at this point in time, there was not anything that would, they didn't really have any kind of training or exams or anything like that for these people to get cleared on before they got the job. Typically when you try to go and get a job, they want to make sure that you actually have experience in that area. And it's not just something that you got because you knew somebody, even though we know that happens too. But before we had the spoils system, and that was where a lot of people were getting jobs in the civil service based on who they knew and personal loyalty. So if you have everybody who all thinks the same, that's a problem. This is, again, this idea of partisan politics, where everybody has the same views. So personal loyalties is more partisan. Now we have what is known as the merit system. So in order for you to get a job in the federal government working in the civil service, you have to pass several tests. You have to have qualifications. It's actually very hard to get jobs in the federal government in certain areas because they expect a lot. You have to have very good test scores. You also have to have a lot of qualifications as far as like your college, where you went to college. You also have to have clear background check because they look into every aspect of your background to make sure that you're a legit person, that you are not in any way doing illegal things. Okay. And it also means a lot when you get a job in the federal government. So the reason that we now have this merit system, we have the Pendleton Act of 1883. It developed a civil service based on a merit system with the use of exams. The consequence, though, at this point, it was difficult to fire these bureaucrats because you had some of these people who had been in office for so long and it was just difficult to get rid of them. Now we also have the Office of Personnel Management, or the OPM, and they're the people who oversee any and all civil service hiring. So no matter what department or where you go, they are the ones that will handle the hiring of civil service employees. So what do you think about the size of our government? This is kind of a discussion. We're just going to look at this real quick. It says, ultimately, the bureaucracy has grown to the size it has because we, the people, have asked for the government to involve itself in all of these areas. Personally, I'm just going to share my opinion. I'm actually anti-big government. I don't think the government should be this big. I think that it's kind of overstepping its powers. To me, when the framers originally came up with this idea of this system of government under the Constitution, I didn't believe that they had any kind of idea that it was going to get this big. Okay? And if you think about how the government affects you in your everyday life, let's look at taxes, for example. Taxes. You have a tax to get a driver's license. You have a tax to mail something. You have a tax to get a house. You have to have a tax to open a business. You also will have to be taxed on your business property. One of the things that I'm just going to bring up here, just as a small mini rant, anytime you see these places that are rioting or they're tearing up property, there was an article that came out recently, and they were just trying to talk about, Minneapolis, for example. And if you remember the damage that was done in Minneapolis over the unfortunate death of George Floyd, I know a lot of people said, well, these places have insurance. That is true, yes. But the article discusses how in Minneapolis, they were making these business owners pay their 2020 property taxes before they could pay money to get the land cleared off to rebuild their buildings. Property taxes of the estimates for most of those buildings were over $100,000. A lot of these people, because we had just come out of a recession, well, not a recession, the COVID issue of the economic kind of collapse a little bit, they don't really have $100,000 sitting around in the bank. Plus, they have to pay their employees. And you also have to pay money to get a permit just to clear off the land to rebuild your building. There's just so many different areas in the government that I feel are overstepping its boundaries. To me, I'm always more small government, but that's just my opinion. I encourage you to read and actually learn about the different areas and everything that they kind of have their hands in. And that way you'll just kind of get an idea of what the government actually does. So the next question, do you think the government does too much or is involved in too much? Or do you think every part is necessary? Explain your reasoning. So I would be, I would be interested in hearing your opinions on some of these things. So what does the bureaucracy do? The bureaucracy ultimately implements and enforces government policy. They have the authority to make rules, they can enforce regulations, and they can issue fines. Bureaucrats may be called to testify at congressional hearings to provide input or answer questions as part of an investigation. And this happens a lot. How does the process work? So this is what you need to know. Congress writes and passes the laws. And when I say Congress, remember I'm talking about the Senate and the House of Representatives. Then the president signs the law and often signals how he wants it implemented. Underneath that, the bureaucracy then determines the additional rules. So like I was saying, the president, sure, he is the head of the executive branch, and yes, he will sign the bill into law and decides how he wants it implemented. Then the bureaucracy underneath him adds additional rules for implementation that are not spelled out in advance by the law. Discretionary authority. So Congress sets general guidelines and laws, but allows the bureaucracy to make further policy decisions. This is known as discretionary authority. Why do they do this? And this is, so it says, why discretionary authority? It saves time, more efficient than Congress. I think this says, hold on, let's pause that for a second. Let's move. We need to move that. Move that. Okay. There we go. All right. So, Congress, wait, no, we're down here. So it saves time. It's more efficient than Congress determining every detail of every law. Congress does not always have the expertise. Just keep in mind that these people who are members of Congress, whether they're a senator or a House of Representatives member, they really might not have any idea what they're talking about when it comes to certain aspects of the government. They are not just these enlightened people that we look at and think of, wow, you're so much smarter than me. No, not really, okay? Most of the time, a lot of these people get elected just because they're somewhat popular. It doesn't mean that they have any more experience or any little experience than the average person, okay? It just means that they're in Congress writing laws, hopefully talking to their constituents or the people who voted for them, but that's not always the case. Okay, so whenever you see these congressmen and women and you think, wow, these are really smart people, no, they're not any different than you most of the time, okay? But for some reason in this country, we look at these people and we think, wow, they're like celebrities. No, they're really not. They're just the average person. They just have a title that they're now in the government. Congress does not always have the expertise, like I said. And then we also have compromise. Laws are also very hard enough to pass without having agree on every detail of legislation. When we get into the legislative branch, you will see how many bills are written and how many bills are typically on the table every day during a congressional session. And it would not make any sense for them to sit there and fight over every little detail of how this law is going to be enforced or how it's going to be written out. So what they do is they just kind of give you the blank or the template, I guess, of how they want the law to look like. And then, like we said, the president will then add certain things to it of how he wants to enforce it. And then now it's up to the bureaucracy to add additional information of how they're going to actually make it happen. Examples. All right. So just so you know, examples. For example, the first one, Congress passes a law stating that large labels must be placed on hazardous household chemical products. If you remember this, a lot of this had to do with the fact that, some of these teenagers, I guess they were teenagers, they were kids. If you remember the whole Tide Pod scandal where a lot of these kids were trying to do the Tide Pod challenge, they thought it was okay to ingest Tide detergent pods. Okay, I don't understand it, But anyway, there's also certain, cleaning products that don't have a label on it saying that it's hazardous. So some, I guess, children or, things like, children, teenagers were actually ingesting or drinking this stuff, thinking it was something else, and they were getting sick and dying. So what happened then is the FDA then created a rule that set further guidelines for what is considered hazardous. So Congress passed a law saying that, okay, you've got to have a label on there, a large label saying that it's a bad hazardous thing, don't drink it. And then the bureaucracy, in this case the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, then creates a rule that says, what is considered hazardous. Because they are the ones who determine, what we said is what is a hazardous substance. Another example, after 9/11, the U.S. government formed the Transportation Security Administration, or TSA, to protect those traveling in the United States. And if you've ever traveled on a plane, or I'm trying to think of anything else major, mostly you'll see the TSA when you go to the airport, but TSA has added a number of rules regarding carry-on liquid restrictions. So when you fly to different states, or if you fly to the country, you're not allowed to just bring full-size bottles of, let's say, shampoo or conditioner, things like that. You've got to get the little travel size. They have it on their website, but most of these things you can just purchase on Amazon or Walmart. But that was something that did not exist before 9/11. It weren't really that strict. You also have cockpit reinforcement, to name a few. So another thing that's happened post 9/11, if you remember the way that 9/11 occurred, these terrorists who boarded the planes, they overtook the cockpit, they overtook the pilot. So now with TSA and Transportation Security Administration, cockpit reinforcement is something they will do. If there's ever any kind of threat on the plane at this point, they will pretty much not the flight attendants, but yeah, they're the flight attendants. They will pretty much put anything they can to block the pathway to the cockpit, and they will also reinforce the cockpit and close and lock the doors. That way the pilots cannot be hurt or attacked, and the plane will stay in the air to its next destination. So, politics and the bureaucracy. The president is the head of the executive branch / bureaucracy. He can use his influence to set an agenda and political goals, but he cannot dictate their decisions. He does not have that much power over all of these things, okay? So, the president appoints cabinet secretaries and agency heads, but he is not allowed to fire civil service employees or regulatory commission heads if he has political differences. Okay? The only way that this person or these people could get fired from their position is if there was some other evidence claiming that they were not doing their job properly as far as, acting, how do I say? Well, for example, we had the FBI situation with Comey, and that he was actually proven that he was not telling the truth in a lot of situations. I'll say that. You can go and look that up. The former FBI head, I think it was Mike Comey, but it's something Comey. Anyway. Iron triangles and issue networks. So what you need to know about this, iron triangles, which we can't watch the video, I'm sorry. This is a mutually beneficial relationship between an agency, a congressional committee, and an interest group. And we will talk about an interest group later. I think it's Unit 4 or Unit 5. This is benefit limited to just these people involved. All right. Issue networks, we also have a network of public officials, lobbyists, which like we'll talk about later, mass media, which is the news, think tanks, and I'll give you some examples of those later, who promote a particular issue for more public benefit, and they are a wide-ranging constituency. So that means a lot of people take part or, know about issue networks. Again, this is an example of an iron triangle and an issue. So we have our interest group, we have our bureaucracy, Congress. All right, so Congress will fund and political support to the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy will then, to the interest group, give low regulation and special favors. And the interest group will then promote electoral support for members of Congress. Same thing with this. The bureaucracy will give Congress policy choices and execution of how they want these laws to be carried out. The Congress will then give friendly legislation and oversight to these interest groups. And then the interest groups will offer congressional support via lobbyists, which we'll talk about, to the bureaucracy. Common criticisms. Again, this is like what I said. The common criticism of bureaucracy of this government is that it's too big and too powerful. The responsibilities are often duplicated. It keeps the government becoming all-powerful, but also creates greater confusion and waste. Too much red tape. Too many rules and regulations. It's also slow-moving. A good example of a slow-moving bureaucracy is when you have to go get your driver's license. The way it worked in Birmingham when I had to go get mine back in the day was you got to get up there at like 7:30 in the morning because the place does not really open until about 8:30 or 9. And that's just to get your spot in line. And after I think maybe 10, 15 people, they cut it off. And if you were not the 15th person in line, you had to go home and try again the next day. And you were typically there for several hours. It's also too difficult to fire ineffective bureaucrats because, again, the president can't fire these people, and unless they're actually doing something that's illegal or wrong, they're not allowed, they're not really going to be fired. Checks on the bureaucracy. This is how these other departments will check the bureaucracy. So, for example, the president, he is the head of the executive branch. He can appoint agency and department heads. However, if you remember, they have to be confirmed by the Senate. The president can also propose changes in these agency budgets. He can issue executive orders. Now, the Supreme Court, the judicial branch, they can declare actions and rules of the bureaucracy unconstitutional. They can also add that rulings can limit bureaucratic practices and they can define the rules. Legislative branch. Again, they can pass legislation or laws that alter the activities of the bureaucracy, and they can then add details to the laws. They can also refuse to appropriate funds or give funds to to the bureaucracy, to the agencies, and they control the purse strings. They can investigate bureaucracy activities through hearings. They can influence the presidential appointments, advise and consent. They may create or disband agencies. And then also, for example, the Government Accountability Office monitors waste and inefficiency in government. And that is the end.